Did you know that nearly half the world's population is represented by one group? That's right, 46%. And no, I'm not talking about the United Nations. I'm talking about BRICS.
BRICS? Oh, you mean the group of countries working together on global politics and economics. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, right?
That's how it started, but there's more to it now. BRICS is growing, and it's becoming a big name in international affairs. They've even added countries like Egypt, Indonesia, and Iran to their list of members.
So, what's the big deal about BRICS? I've heard people call it an alternative to the G7, the group of the richest countries in the world. But does BRICS really have that kind of power?
That's the big question, isn't it? Some see BRICS as a rising star, a group that could balance the power of the G7. Others think it's just a lot of talk with no real impact.
Either way, they've been making moves, setting up banks, talking about their own currency, and hosting major summits every year. It's definitely worth diving into what they've done and what they hope to achieve.
Absolutely. And the story of how BRICS came together is fascinating. It all started with a simple idea from an economist. Let's go back to the beginning to see how this group formed and why they've gained so much attention.
Let's rewind to the early 2000s. The idea of BRICS started in 2001, thanks to Jim O'Neill, an economist at Goldman Sachs. He wasn't talking about politics at the time, just about investment opportunities. He came up with the term BRIC to highlight four fast-growing economies: Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
That's right. He saw these countries as the future of global growth. But at that point, they weren't working together politically. It wasn't until 2006 that the foreign ministers of these countries met for the first time in New York. It was a side meeting during a United Nations event.
Exactly. That meeting started something bigger. In 2009, the first official BRICS summit took place in Yekaterinburg, Russia. The leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, and China came together to discuss global issues, especially the financial crisis happening at the time.
And they didn't just talk about economics. They wanted more say in international politics, too. They called for changes to global systems like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which were dominated by Western countries.
Then in 2010, something important happened. South Africa wanted to join. They weren't part of the original BRIC idea, but they pushed hard to be included.
And they succeeded. South Africa officially joined in late 2010, and by 2011, the group became known as BRICS. Their first summit as a five-member group was held that year in Sanya, China.
It's interesting because South Africa's economy isn't as big as the others, but their inclusion brought diversity. Now, BRICS wasn't just about big economies. It was also about representing different parts of the world.
That's true. You had Brazil representing South America, Russia for Eastern Europe, India and China for Asia, and now South Africa for Africa. It made the group more global and gave them a stronger voice in international discussions.
And this wasn't just about meetings. The group had real goals: to work together on trade, development, and even security. From this point on, BRICS started making its mark on the world stage.
So, BRICS started as a group of 5 countries, but it didn't stop there. Over time, more nations showed interest, and some even joined. By 2024, BRICS became BRICS Plus.
I think the plus part began when 6 new countries were invited to join at the 2023 summit in South Africa, right? Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Argentina were all on the list.
Exactly, though not all of them joined. Argentina, for example, decided not to accept the invitation after a change in government. But the other 5 moved forward. By January 2024, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE became official members, while Saudi Arabia delayed its decision.
It's fascinating because these new members bring a lot of diversity. You've got countries from the Middle East, North Africa, and even East Africa. And then, in early 2025, Indonesia joined too, becoming the first Southeast Asian member.
That's a big deal. Indonesia is the 4th most populous country in the world and has one of the fastest-growing economies in Asia. Adding them made BRICS even more significant.
But with all this diversity, doesn't it make things complicated? I mean, these countries have very different economies, cultures, and even political systems.
That's true, and it's one of the main challenges for BRICS Plus. While the group wants to unite as a voice for the global south, the members don't always agree on priorities. For example, China and India have serious political tensions, and their goals for BRICS don't always align.
And some critics argue that expanding too quickly could make BRICS lose focus. It's hard to manage a group when everyone has different interests.
That's why BRICS has been careful with its expansion. New members bring fresh perspectives and resources, but they also need to align with the group's goals, like reducing dependency on Western institutions and promoting fair global policies.
Still, adding these countries shows how BRICS is positioning itself as a major player on the world stage. It's no longer just about the original five, it's about building a broader coalition for change.
Exactly. And as BRICS Plus grows, it'll be interesting to see how this new mix of countries works together to shape the future of global politics and economics.
BRICS might face challenges, but they've accomplished some impressive things since they started. One of their biggest achievements is the New Development Bank, or NDB.
Oh, definitely. The NDB was set up in 2014 to help fund infrastructure and development projects in member countries. It's like an alternative to the World Bank, which many developing nations feel is dominated by the West.
Exactly. The NDB has approved projects worth billions of dollars, from renewable energy in India to transport networks in Brazil. And here's the cool part. It also gives loans to non-BRICS countries, like Bangladesh and Uruguay.
That's smart. It makes BRICS look more inclusive. But the NDB isn't the only thing they've done. Don't forget the BRICS Contingent Reserve Arrangement.
Right. That's their financial safety net, created in case any member faces a currency crisis. It's like a mini IMF, but without the harsh conditions that often come with IMF loans.
And let's not forget their efforts in technology. They've worked on projects like BRICS Pay, a system for cross-border payments. It's supposed to make trade easier between member countries by avoiding traditional systems like SWIFT.
They've also started talking about creating their own shared currency. It's still just an idea, but if they pull it off, it could be a big step toward reducing dependence on the US dollar.
And they're not just about money. They've also worked on data sharing, like their annual statistical publication. It's a way to build trust and share knowledge among members.
All these achievements show that BRICS is more than just talk. They're actively building systems and institutions to support their vision of a fairer global economy.
True. Whether you agree with their approach or not, you can't deny that BRICS has made its mark.
When people talk about BRICS, they often compare it to the G7. The G7 is seen as a group of the world's richest nations, like the US, Japan, and Germany. But BRICS represents something different, doesn't it?
It does. The G7 focuses on wealthier, industrialized nations, while BRICS represents emerging economies. Together, BRICS makes up about 35% of the world's GDP when measured in purchasing power parity. That's no small feat.
Not at all. But the big question is whether BRICS is a real competitor to the G7. Supporters of BRICS argue that it offers an alternative to Western-led systems. For example, the New Development Bank challenges the World Bank, and BRICS has discussed creating its own currency to reduce reliance on the dollar.
But critics say BRICS isn't as united as the G7. The G7 countries are similar in terms of values and systems, but BRICS has major differences, like political systems and economic strengths. Some even say BRICS members are too focused on their own national interests to work together effectively.
That's true. India and China, for example, have ongoing border disputes, which makes cooperation tricky. And while China's economy dominates the group, countries like South Africa and Ethiopia have much smaller economies.
And yet, BRICS has something the G7 doesn't: a direct connection to the global south. This gives BRICS a unique position to speak for developing nations and push for changes to global systems.
So maybe the answer isn't competition or coexistence. Maybe BRICS and the G7 represent two sides of the same coin, different ways to approach global challenges.
That's a good way to put it. BRICS isn't perfect, but it's creating space for countries that haven't had much of a voice before.
While BRICS has achieved a lot, it's not without its problems. One of the biggest challenges is the tension between its members. Take India and China, for example. They've had serious border disputes for years.
That's a tough one. It's hard to build trust when two key members have military standoffs. And then there's the issue of economic imbalance. China's economy is massive, contributing about 70% of BRICS' total GDP. Compare that to South Africa or Ethiopia, and the gap is huge.
Exactly. That imbalance gives China more influence in the group, which can make other members feel sidelined. For instance, countries like India might worry that China's dominance could turn BRICS into something that mainly serves Beijing's interests.
And it's not just internal issues. BRICS also faces criticism from the outside. Some say it's just a group of countries with different goals, trying to look united. Critics argue that they talk about big ideas like a shared currency, but those ideas rarely turn into action.
That's fair. Even Jim O'Neill, the economist who first came up with the term BRIC, has called the group ineffective. He thinks they're good at making symbolic gestures, but not at delivering real results.
Another challenge is their global image. Some people in the West see BRICS as anti-Western or even anti-American. That perception can make it harder for BRICS to gain support from other nations.
Still, it's worth remembering that no group is perfect. Every organization has growing pains, especially one as diverse as BRICS.
True. The question is whether they can overcome these challenges and work together effectively. If they can, BRICS has the potential to shape a more balanced world order.
So, with all its achievements and challenges, where do you think BRICS is headed? Do they have the potential to reshape the global order?
They might. The fact that BRICS continues to expand shows that many countries see it as a valuable group. Adding members like Indonesia and the UAE makes it clear that BRICS isn't slowing down. They're building a stronger voice for the global south.
True, but the expansion also brings questions. Can they manage all these different countries with unique goals? And will the older members like China and India be willing to share power with the new ones?
That's a fair point, but I think their future depends on finding common ground. If they can focus on shared issues, like fair trade, development, and reducing reliance on Western-led systems, they could really make an impact.
And don't forget the potential for a shared currency. If they ever succeed in creating one, it could change the way global trade works. It's a bold idea, but it shows they're thinking big.
Exactly. BRICS is still evolving, and its future isn't set in stone. But one thing's clear. They've already changed how we think about global power.
So we've covered a lot about BRICS, from its origins as an economic idea to a growing group of 10 countries representing nearly half the world's population. It's clear that BRICS is reshaping global politics in its own way.
Right? They've built institutions like the new Development Bank, pushed for a more balanced global economy, and created a platform for emerging nations. But challenges like internal tensions and criticism from the West can't be ignored.
Still, whether you see BRICS as a rising star or just symbolic, you can't deny its influence. It's giving developing countries a louder voice on the world stage.
And as BRICS grows, the big question is, can they truly unite to make real change? Or will their differences hold them back? That's something only time will tell.
What do you think? Will BRICS become a global powerhouse, or is it just a big idea with no lasting impact?
Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us whose biography or what global topic you'd like us to cover next.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.